"Guests wait by the rope," Ava Monroe said, and the lobby became so quiet Grace could hear rain sliding down the glass doors behind her. The Belmont house stood on Fifth Avenue like a polished secret, all marble floors, brass elevator doors, white orchids, and warm chandelier light trapped beneath a ceiling painted the color of old cream. Outside, Manhattan moved through a wet November evening, taxis hissing along the curb, umbrellas opening under the awning, doormen in dark coats guiding residents through the drizzle. Inside, a velvet rope had been placed near the concierge desk for the private penthouse reception Nathan Whitfield was hosting upstairs. Grace Harrington Whitfield stopped just inside the entrance with water still beading on the shoulders of her cream wool coat, a leather envelope marked Harrington Property Trust held carefully in one hand. She had not expected kindness from Nathan anymore. Kindness had left their marriage in small ways first, through missed dinners, quiet phone screens turned face down, and invitations that began arriving without her name. But she had not expected to be stopped in her own lobby like a stranger waiting to be permitted into a room built by her family. Ava stood beside the velvet rope in a silver evening dress, one hand resting on a private elevator card, the other curled around a champagne flute she had not yet earned the right to hold. Her smile was light, bright, and shaped for witnesses. Nathan stood beside her in a black overcoat over a charcoal suit, his expression controlled, his jaw still, his silence already choosing a side. Behind them, guests gathered near the flower arrangements, wealthy neighbors, donors, 2 real estate partners, and a few society women who knew enough history to lower their eyes when they saw Grace. The lobby smelled of rain, polished wood, lilies, and expensive perfume. Ava looked Grace up and down as if measuring how much humiliation could fit between them. "I am sorry," she said, though nothing in her face understood apology. "This reception is private. Nathan's guests are being escorted upstairs." She touched the elevator card with 2 fingers. "If you are here to visit someone, the guest waiting area is over there." Grace looked toward the chairs near the side wall, the same chairs where her mother used to sit every December while staff children picked ornaments from the lobby tree. A small ache moved through her chest, but she did not answer. She only tightened her fingers around the leather envelope. Nathan finally spoke, low and careful. "Grace, this is not the evening for complications." Complications. That was what he called her presence now. Not wife. Not family. Not the woman whose name had opened the doors he used to impress Ava. "I received notice of a building event," Grace said. Her voice was calm, but the doorman by the brass entrance heard the steel beneath it. Ava gave a small laugh and turned slightly toward the guests. "A notice is not an invitation. Some people confuse history with access." The words landed across the marble floor. A man near the orchid table looked away. The concierge paused behind his computer. Arthur Bennett, the senior doorman, stood near the entrance in white gloves and a navy coat, his silver hair neat beneath the lobby light. He had opened this door for Grace when she was 8 years old and carrying a school violin case bigger than her arm. Now his eyes moved from Ava's hand on the elevator card to the envelope bearing the Harrington seal. Ava lifted her chin, enjoying the silence. "Please check the guest list," she told the concierge. "I doubt the former Mrs. Whitfield is on it." Nathan did not correct her. Grace looked at him then, and the last soft thread between them thinned without sound. Across the lobby, Arthur Bennett stepped away from the brass doors and reached for the security tablet on the concierge desk, his gloved hand steady as the screen lit up with a name Ava had not bothered to learn. The Belmont house had belonged to Grace long before Nathan learned how to pronounce its name with ownership in his voice. She had been 9 the first winter her mother brought her through the brass doors after a snowstorm, her wool mittens damp, her boots leaving small prints on the marble while the lobby smelled of cedar polish, wet coats, and the white orchids her grandmother insisted on. Replacing every Monday morning. Eleanor Harrington had stopped at the concierge desk and made Grace say good evening to every person on duty. Arthur at the door, Mr. Bell in maintenance, Teresa behind the desk, and Mrs. Alvarez from housekeeping, who always kept peppermint candies in her apron pocket. "Remember their names," her mother had said softly, guiding Grace toward the private elevator with one gloved hand on her shoulder. A building is only beautiful if people are treated with dignity inside it. Grace did not understand then that she was being taught ownership. She thought she was being taught manners. The Belmont was not the tallest building on Fifth Avenue, nor the newest, nor the one with the most photographed roof terrace. Its value lived in quieter things. The brass handles polished until they held the reflection of everyone who entered, the old mail room with dark wood boxes, the private elevator lined in walnut, the lobby clock her grandmother had saved from a closed train station in 1948. The Harrington family had kept the building through recessions, lawsuits, bad winters, and offers from developers who wanted to turn it into glass and steel with no memory. Grace grew up hearing the story of her grandmother refusing a sale after the financial crisis because 3 retired tenants had nowhere else to go. Property is not power, her grandmother used to say. It is responsibility with a roof. When Grace married Nathan, she brought him through those same brass doors on a rainy evening not unlike this one. He had looked upward at the chandeliers, the marble, the quiet greetings from staff, and smiled as if the building had confirmed something he already believed about himself. At first, she mistook that smile for wonder. Later, she learned it was hunger dressed as admiration. Nathan began inviting investors to the penthouse lounge, using the private elevator for clients, asking staff to arrange flowers for his receptions, saying "our building" in rooms where Grace was too tired to correct him. He never stayed late to review repair budgets. He never signed staff holiday bonuses. He never answered calls when old pipes burst on the 12th floor or when a widow in 9B needed emergency access after losing her keys. Grace did those things. The Harrington Property Trust paid the insurance, approved renovations, protected employee benefits, and kept the lobby from becoming a showroom for Nathan's ambition. After the separation, Grace returned to the trust office and reviewed every access rule he had stretched in her absence. She did not announce it. She simply restored the lines her mother had taught her never to let anyone blur. Now, standing behind the velvet rope while Ava called her a guest, Grace looked at the marble floor where her childhood boots had once left melted snow. Arthur Bennett's gloved hand moved over the security tablet, and the lobby, with all its brass and memory, seemed to hold its breath. The security tablet glowed in Arthur Bennett's hands, but Ava did not wait for the truth to load before enjoying the theater of Grace being stopped. She turned slightly toward the guests near the orchid table, letting the silver fabric of her dress catch the chandelier light, then gestured toward the velvet rope with the private elevator card still between her fingers. "It is simple," she said. "If she is not on the list, she waits like everyone else." The concierge behind the desk looked uncomfortable, his eyes moving from Ava to Nathan, then to Grace. He was young enough not to know all the old stories of the Belmont house, but old enough in service to understand when a room had become cruel. Nathan adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit, his black overcoat open beneath the warm lobby lights. "Grace," he said, with the tired patience of a man who had arranged the insult and now resented her for standing inside it. "This reception is for residents, partners, and invited guests. You do not need to make a point tonight." Grace looked at him through the soft blur of rain shining behind the glass doors. There had been a time when he would have taken her coat from her shoulders in this lobby, kissed her temple, and thanked Arthur for keeping the entrance clear in bad weather. Now he stood beside another woman and let her use a guest list to decide whether Grace belonged in the building her family had kept, standing for 3 generations. Ava smiled. "Exactly. We are trying to keep the evening elegant." She leaned closer to the concierge desk. "Please check under Whitfield, or perhaps Harrington, if she is still using that when it suits her." A small silence spread outward from the desk. The private reception guests felt it and pretended to study their champagne, their phones, the flowers, anything except the woman being reduced to an administrative problem in her own marble lobby. Grace felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not let it fall. Her mother's voice returned to her with painful clarity. "Dignity is not how people treat you when they remember who you are. Dignity is how you stand when they choose to forget." She lowered the Harrington Trust envelope to her side and rested her thumb over the embossed seal. The paper was dry beneath her glove, protected from the rain, protected from the performance unfolding around it. The concierge typed Grace's name into the guest system. Nothing appeared under Nathan's reception list. Ava's smile widened just enough. "There," she said softly. "No invitation." Nathan did not look at the screen. He looked at Grace, and for the first time that evening, something like warning entered his eyes. "You should go upstairs another time," he said. "This is not your night." Grace looked past him toward the private elevator, the walnut doors polished until the brass trim reflected the orchids, and the rope and Ava's hand, holding a card she should never have touched. "No," Ava added, almost gently. "Tonight is for people who are actually part of Nathan's future." The sentence landed across the marble like a glass set down too hard. Grace's fingers tightened once around the envelope, then relaxed. Arthur Bennett did not look up from the security tablet immediately. His gloved thumb moved across the screen, past the guest list, past the event schedule, past the private elevator access log. Then his posture changed. Not dramatically, not enough for Ava to notice at first. But Grace noticed. Arthur had found the building record beneath the reception list, the one that did not care who Nathan had invited, who Ava had dismissed, or who stood behind a velvet rope pretending power could be borrowed without permission. Grace had restored those records herself 3 months earlier, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had finally understood how much Nathan had mistaken access for ownership. After the separation, she stopped sleeping in the penthouse and moved into the quiet apartment her grandmother had kept on the 6th floor, the one with linen curtains, a narrow writing desk, and a view of the old church across the street. It was not the largest unit in the Belmont house. It was not the one Nathan liked to show investors. But it was the first place Grace had breathed without waiting for his footsteps in the hall or his phone lighting up with names he never explained. The first morning there, she woke before sunrise to the low rumble of delivery trucks on 5th Avenue and the soft mechanical sigh of the building heating system. She made coffee in her grandmother's blue enamel pot, opened the Harrington Property Trust binders, and began reading what Nathan had been using while she had been trying to survive the marriage. The private elevator access log showed late-night guests cleared under spouse privilege. The penthouse lounge had been reserved for investor dinners that were never approved by the trust. Staff had been asked to prepare flowers, catering trays, car service, and security arrangements under Nathan's personal requests, then told to bill the building account as resident hospitality. None of it was criminal. That almost made it worse. It was entitlement polished until it looked like routine. Grace sat at the writing desk with rain tapping against the window and felt something quiet inside her become clear. A door left open too long was still her responsibility to close. She did not call Nathan. She did not accuse Ava. She called the trust attorney, the building manager, and the head of residential services. By noon, spouse transfer authority was frozen. By evening, all private elevator access required direct owner authorization. By the end of the week, every event request tied to the penthouse, lobby, staff, or Harrington accounts had to be reviewed by the trust office. Grace signed each update with a steady hand, then walked downstairs to speak with the employees herself. She told the concierge team they would not be punished for past approvals. She told housekeeping no resident could demand unpaid extra service. She told Arthur Bennett that if anyone used her name, her family, or the building's privileges without authorization, he could call her directly, no matter the hour. Arthur had only nodded, but his eyes had softened in the way older men's eyes do when loyalty is not requested, only honored. He remembered Eleanor Harrington, Grace's mother, paying for his wife's surgery after the insurance claim was denied years before. He remembered Grace at 9 years old, holding a violin case in the snow. He remembered the Harrington women not because they owned the building, but because they treated the people inside it as if they mattered. Now, in the lobby, while Ava smiled beside the velvet rope and Nathan waited for Grace to accept humiliation politely, those updates sat inside the system like a locked door with the right name on it. Arthur's tablet reflected in his white gloves. The screen did not show a guest trying to enter. It showed the authorized owner representative present on site. Arthur Bennett had learned long ago that a doorman's first duty was not opening doors. It was knowing when a door should remain closed until the truth caught up. For 38 years, he had stood beneath the brass awning of the Belmont house through snowstorms, summer heat, holiday mornings, late-night arrivals, and quiet emergencies residents hoped would not become gossip by breakfast. He had watched children become adults, tenants become widows, fortunes rise, marriages cool, and guests mistake the warmth of the lobby for permission to behave as if the building belonged to them. The Belmont remembered more than most people wanted remembered. Arthur did too. His gloved hand moved over the security tablet while Ava's voice continued behind him, bright and impatient. "This should not be difficult," she said. "If she is not on the list, she is not part of the reception." The young concierge swallowed and kept his eyes on the desk. Monitor. Nathan remained beside Ava, doing nothing, which in that lobby sounded louder than any insult. Grace stood behind the velvet rope with the Harrington Trust envelope resting against her cream coat, her face pale but steady, rain still shining in small beads along her sleeves. Arthur did not need a tablet to know who she was. He had opened the door for her when she was a schoolgirl with a violin case. He had watched her mother kneel in the lobby to tie Grace's scarf before a winter recital. He had seen Grace return after college, after marriage, after grief, and after the kind of separation that made even familiar marble feel like a place to cross carefully. But the building required more than memory now. It required record. He tapped past the reception guest list, where Nathan Whitfield's event had been entered under penthouse social use, then opened the Access Authority file updated 3 months earlier. The screen brightened under the chandelier light. Harrington Property Trust. Authorized owner representative, Grace Harrington Whitfield. Direct access required. Private elevator authority, active. Spouse transfer authority, frozen. Event approval required for lobby, staff, penthouse, and building accounts. Arthur read the lines once, then again, not because he doubted them, but because procedure deserved respect when it was about to correct arrogance. A second notice appeared below the first, owner representative present on site. The words sat there calmly, immune to Ava's perfume, Nathan's silence, and the velvet rope placed where Grace had once helped hang Christmas garland as a child. Arthur looked up. Ava was smiling at the guests now, as if the pause had already proven her right. "I am trying to protect the tone of the evening," she said. "It is awkward when people do not know where they belong." Grace lowered her eyes for one breath. Arthur saw it, and something in his chest tightened with an old loyalty that had never needed instruction. Eleanor Harrington had once paid the hospital bill that kept Arthur's wife from choosing between treatment and rent. Grace had sent flowers every year on the anniversary of that surgery, quietly, without making it charity. The Harrington women did not need to remind the staff of their power. They reminded them of their humanity. Arthur set the tablet on the concierge desk and removed the small brass barrier latch from the velvet rope. The metal made a clean sound in the quiet lobby. Ava turned, surprised. "Excuse me," she said. "That area is for invited guests." Arthur did not answer her first. He stepped past Nathan, past the champagne tray, past the white orchids, and stopped in front of Grace. Then he bowed with the same formal dignity he had offered her grandmother, her mother, and now her. "Good evening, Madam Owner," he said. "We apologize for the delay." For 1 second, no one in the Belmont house moved. The words seemed to remain suspended beneath the chandeliers, brighter than the brass doors, sharper than the rain tapping against the glass. "Madam Owner." They did not sound loud. They did not need to. They traveled across the marble floor, past the velvet rope Ava had used as a border, past the champagne tray, past the white orchids, and settled directly where Ava's smile had been. Grace stood very still as Arthur Bennett bowed before her, the Harrington Trust envelope resting against her coat, her eyes shining but no longer lowered. She had heard staff call her many things over the years. Miss Grace when she was a child, Mrs. Whitfield after the wedding, Miss Harrington again in quiet corners after the separation. But Madam Owner was not a title she had ever asked for. It was the building remembering her aloud. Ava blinked first. Her hand tightened around Nathan's private elevator card, the small black rectangle catching the chandelier light like a borrowed jewel. "What did you just call her?" she asked, her voice still polished, but thinner now at the edges. Arthur straightened with the careful dignity of a man who had opened doors for people with real power and people who only performed it. "Madam Owner," he repeated. "The authorized owner representative of the Belmont house is present." The young concierge looked down at his monitor again, his face changing as the same record appeared on his screen. Nathan stepped forward before the silence could become judgment. "Arthur," he said, keeping his voice low, "this is a private reception. There is no need to make this dramatic." Grace looked at him then, and the old pain moved through her without taking command. Dramatic. That was what he called the truth whenever it interrupted his convenience. Ava gave a small laugh and lifted the elevator card slightly, as if the plastic could still rescue the evening. Nathan has access, she said. We are hosting upstairs. The guests are waiting. Arthur looked at the card, then at the security tablet on the desk. That card was issued under spouse hospitality privileges, he said. Those privileges are currently suspended pending direct approval. The lobby seemed to draw in a breath. A woman near the orchids lowered her champagne glass. One of Nathan's real estate partners glanced toward the private elevator, as if the brass doors had suddenly become less welcoming. Ava's face tightened. Suspended. Nathan's jaw shifted once, but he did not answer. He had known Grace had been reviewing the trust records. He had not known she had closed the doors quietly enough for him to walk into them in public. Ava turned toward Grace, no longer smiling fully, but still trying to keep the room beneath her. This is unnecessary, she said. I was simply managing the guest entrance. Grace's thumb rested over the Harrington seal on the envelope. No, she said softly. You were deciding who belonged in a building you do not manage. The words were calm, but they changed the air more than anger would have. Arthur moved to the concierge desk and placed the velvet rope latch fully aside. The opening it created was small, only a few feet of cleared marble, but everyone in the lobby understood what had happened. Grace had not pushed through. The building had opened for her. Ava looked at Nathan, waiting for him to correct the embarrassment, to restore the story he had let her believe. But Nathan was staring at Grace with the expression of a man realizing that silence had finally stopped protecting him. Behind them, the private elevator doors remained closed, their brass surface reflecting all four figures. Grace in cream, wounded but upright. Arthur in white gloves, loyal and formal. Ava holding an access card losing its meaning, and Nathan standing beside a privilege he could no longer transfer. Ava did not surrender the private elevator card right away. Pride held it in her hand longer than authority did. She looked from Arthur Bennett to the brass elevator doors, then to the guests gathered near the orchids, as if public disbelief could still become public support if she gave it enough confidence. Nathan, she said, quietly at first, then louder when he did not answer quickly enough. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Nathan's eyes remained on Grace. The lobby light caught the rain on her cream coat, the Harrington seal on her envelope, the stillness in her face that he had once mistaken for softness. He had seen that stillness before during difficult dinners, trust meetings, and the last months of their marriage, but he had always believed silence meant she would eventually make room for him. Tonight, her silence made no room at all. Grace, he said, smoothing his voice into the tone he used with investors. This does not need to become an issue in front of everyone. The reception is already arranged. Ava has guests upstairs. Grace looked at the champagne tray, the white orchids, the velvet rope now hanging open, and the private elevator card Ava still held like a fading argument. The reception was arranged through access that no longer transfers, she said. The words were simple, almost administrative, but they moved through the lobby with more force than anger. Ava gave a small, sharp breath. Access that no longer transfers? This is a building, not a family courtroom. Arthur's face did not change. The Belmont house is managed through the Harrington Property Trust, Ms. Monroe. Private elevator and penthouse event privileges require direct approval from the authorized representative. Ava turned to the concierge. Run the card. The young man froze for half a second, then looked at Arthur, then at Grace. Nathan's jaw tightened. It was the first sign that he understood the scene had slipped beyond charm. Ava walked to the private elevator panel herself, silver dress. Brushing the marble, heels clicking in the quiet. She pressed Nathan's card to the reader with the exact confidence of a woman who had been promised more than anyone had the right to give. The panel blinked amber. Not green. Not open. Amber, waiting. A soft tone sounded, polite and final enough to humiliate without raising its voice. The small screen beside the brass doors displayed, owner authorization required. Several guests saw it. One of Nathan's real estate partners looked down at his shoes. A woman in a black coat slowly lowered her champagne glass. Ava stared at the screen as if the machine had insulted her personally. It worked earlier, she said. Arthur stepped beside the panel, not touching the card in her hand. Earlier today, temporary access was pending review. The owner representative is now present. The phrase owner representative carried Grace's name without needing to repeat it. Nathan moved closer to Grace. lowering his voice though the lobby had already learned to listen. "Do not do this," he said. "Do not embarrass me over a reception." Grace's eyes lifted to his. For a moment, the marble lobby dissolved into all the small places where he had asked her to shrink so his life could remain smooth. Dinner tables, elevators, charity events, penthouse hallways, quiet mornings after lies. "You embarrassed yourself," she said. "You let her call me a guest in my mother's building." Nathan looked away first. Ava turned from the elevator, color high in her face now, the private card still pinched between her fingers. "Your mother's building," she repeated, trying to make the phrase sound sentimental instead of legal. Arthur reached for the security tablet again and angled it toward the concierge, not the guests. He did not expose private records for spectacle. He only confirmed what procedure required. "Madam Owner," he said to Grace, formal and clear, "do you authorize Ms. Monroe's use of the private elevator, the penthouse reception, and lobby staff services this evening?" The lobby became completely still. The rope was open. The card had failed. Nathan was silent. Ava stood before the brass doors with borrowed access in her hand, and every person in the Belmont house waited for the woman she had called a guest to decide who was allowed to enter. Grace did not answer at once. She let the silence hold what Ava had tried to cover with confidence and what Nathan had tried to hide behind manners. Rain traced silver lines down the glass doors behind her, and the lobby chandeliers reflected in the marble floor like small, unblinking witnesses. Arthur Bennett stood beside the private elevator panel, one gloved hand resting near the security tablet, waiting for her instruction as calmly as if he were asking whether she wanted an umbrella brought to the curb. That calm made the moment sharper. Ava's hand remained closed around the elevator card, but the screen beside the brass doors still read owner authorization required. Grace looked at the card first, then at the velvet rope, then at the young concierge who had been forced to check her name like she was a stranger in her own inheritance. "No," Grace said. The word was soft, almost gentle. It still moved through the lobby like a locked door. Ava blinked. "No." Grace turned fully toward Arthur. "I do not authorize private elevator access for Ava Monroe. I do not authorize the penthouse reception under Harrington Property Trust Services. I do not authorize lobby staff, flowers, security, catering support, or building accounts to be used for this event." Each sentence arrived cleanly, without heat, without insult, without a raised voice. That was what made Nathan's face lose color. There was nothing in her tone he could call emotional, nothing he could dismiss as jealousy, nothing he could reshape into a scene where he was the reasonable man and she was the wounded wife. It was governance. It was record. It was the building answering him through her. The concierge looked down at his monitor, then cleared his throat carefully. "The system confirms direct owner approval is required for all listed services," he said. His voice shook once, then steadied. "Current authorized representative is Grace Harrington Whitfield." Ava's lips parted, but no sound came at first. The private elevator card looked smaller in her hand now, less like proof and more like something borrowed from a drawer she had never been allowed to open. "Nathan told me this was handled," she said, but her voice had lost the brightness that had humiliated Grace minutes earlier. Nathan looked toward the guests, then toward Arthur, then finally at Grace. "I arranged this as a resident," he said. Grace held his gaze. "You arranged it using privileges connected to a family trust you do not control." Arthur extended his hand, not demanding, not harsh, only formal. "The card, please." Ava looked at Nathan again. He did not save her. The same silence he had used against Grace now turned and stood beside him like judgment. Slowly, Ava placed the card in Arthur's gloved palm. The plastic made a small sound against white cotton. Around the lobby, people pretended not to watch, but everyone watched. Arthur returned to the concierge desk and entered the update. The amber light on the elevator panel disappeared. The brass doors remained closed. The champagne tray was set down untouched. The white orchids stood perfectly still. Grace opened the Harrington Trust envelope and removed a single cream sheet with the building seal at the top. "The reception can end quietly," she said. "Guests may be escorted out with courtesy. No one is to be embarrassed by staff for attending an event they were told was approved." That sentence changed the room again. Even now, she protected other people from the shame Nathan had created. Ava looked down. Nathan stared at Grace as if he was seeing not the woman he left behind, but the woman who had been carrying the doors, the keys, the staff, the rules, and the dignity of the Belmont house long before he learned how to stand inside it and pretend it was his. Grace did not use the authority in her hand to punish the room. That was what made it impossible for Nathan to argue against it. She stood in the center of the marble lobby, rain still shining on her cream coat, the Harrington Trust letter resting between her fingers, and gave instructions in the same calm voice her mother had once used when teaching her to greet every employee by name. "Please have car service brought to the curb for any guest who needs it," she said to the concierge. No staff member is to apologize for enforcing a rule that was ignored above them. The young concierge nodded, relief crossing his face so quickly it almost looked like gratitude. Arthur Bennett stood beside the desk with Ava's elevator card in his gloved hand, waiting until Grace gave him permission to log it back into the secure drawer. Ava remained near the brass elevator doors, her silver dress bright beneath the chandeliers, but her confidence had become something brittle. She looked at the guests who had come to see her rise inside Nathan's world and found them quietly collecting coats, setting down untouched champagne, lowering their eyes as if dignity had made gossip feel indecent. Nathan stepped closer to Grace, lowering his voice enough to pretend privacy still belonged to him. "You did not have to do it like this," he said. Grace looked at him, and for a moment she saw all the years between them. The first rainy night, he entered the Belmont house with wonder in his eyes. The dinners where he praised her family's building as if it had chosen him. The slow way his gratitude became entitlement. The colder way his entitlement became erasure. "I did not do this," she said. "I corrected what you misused." He glanced toward Ava, then back at Grace, caught between embarrassment and the habit of wanting her to soften the consequences for him. "We should talk upstairs." Grace folded the trust letter once and slid it back into the leather envelope. "The private elevator is not available to you tonight." The sentence was gentle. It still closed every door he had tried to borrow. Arthur opened the secure drawer behind the concierge desk, placed Ava's card inside, and entered the final update. The small click of the drawer locking was barely audible beneath the rain, but everyone near the lobby desk heard it. Grace turned to the staff. "The lobby flowers stay as they are. The overtime hours for this event will be paid from the deposit already collected. Anything remaining goes into the Employee Assistance Fund." Arthur's expression changed for one brief second, the formal mask giving way to something older and warmer. Eleanor Harrington would have understood. The guests began leaving through the brass doors, escorted with umbrellas and quiet courtesy. No one was shamed. No one was chased. The room simply returned to order, and that order no longer served Nathan's performance. Ava stood beside him without the card, without the elevator, without the certainty she had worn like jewelry. Grace walked toward the private elevator alone. Arthur reached the panel before her and used his own access to call it. This time the light turned green. The brass doors opened with a soft, familiar chime, revealing the walnut walls inside, polished and warm, the same elevator her mother had stepped into with her decades before. Nathan said her name once, not loudly, but with the sound of a man arriving too late at a door he had assumed would always open. Grace paused at the threshold, not turning all the way back. "Guests wait for permission," she said. "Owners protect what was trusted to them." Then she stepped inside. The doors closed slowly, reflecting Nathan, Ava, Arthur, the orchids, the velvet rope, and the lobby that had remembered the truth before anyone else was brave enough to say it. Grace did not win him back. She did not need to. She rose through the Belmont house in silence, carrying her mother's name, her own dignity, and the quiet certainty that some doors do not close in defeat. Some doors close because a woman has finally returned to herself.